If you can deliver an amazing service to a small number of people, if you're a small business, then you've got something that is sustainable.
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner Sharon Sutton.
My guest today is Adam Owen, Curriculum and Training Director at NextGen Planners in the UK. Adam is currently President of the Personal Finance Society, and that's the largest professional body for retail financial advisors in the UK, with over 40,000 members and the largest issuer of statements of professional standing for financial advisors. So it's actually the most common professional body that Isle of Man advisors belong to. Adam joined the profession in the mid-1990s, and he's held advisory roles within direct sales and the IFA sector, providing technical compliance support to both directly authorised firms and networks. He was a founding director of the support provider EQI Consultancy and has held a variety of senior compliance and supervision positions. More recently, he's focused on developing career pathways throughout the profession, becoming a Chartered Insurance Institute and Personal Finance Society accredited trainer. And indeed, I know that this year his theme as president of the Personal Finance Society is leadership, training up the next succession of leaders within the profession. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Adam Owen. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to the Isle of Man. Thank you very much for coming.
Hello, Sharon, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, I think it probably is fair to say that I probably wouldn't have started this podcast on my own volition, and I may have had some encouragement in this area to start by somebody sitting very close to me here.
I think I might have mentioned it once or twice over the last 12 months, hadn't I?
Yeah, so it's pretty fitting that you're one of my first guests here, really, given that it's your fault.
It's the only way I ever get invited onto podcasts, Sharon, is to ask all of my friends and colleagues to actually start podcasts.
Yes, well, welcome to the Isle of Man. You know, the Isle of Man is a fairly special place for those of us who live and work here, and in some cases were born here. So I wondered if you'd, first of all, like to tell me a little bit about yourself and what brings you to the Isle of Man, and, well, if we start there, really.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I'll do a bit of a potted history, maybe. I originally, when I left school, I began my first career, really, in food retail. And I think that the managerial functions at Sainsbury's, which is where I started my career, and all of the people who observed my 4.5 years there, realised quite quickly that providing the people of Greater Manchester with yoghurt was probably not my calling in life. And given that I needed to find something to do, and it was the mid-1990s, I looked around at various careers fairs, and one of the things that cropped up was financial advice and financial advising. And at the time, it was a career opportunity that really was useful or good for me to explore, because we were in the very early stages of professionalising an industry. And so I was interested in finance generally, and I was interested in having the ability to build a business and work with people. And there was a lot of things that attracted me to the career of being a financial advisor. So I handed in my notice as a retail manager, and the people of Manchester will be delighted with that, because at least my successors, I'm sure, would have done a better job of getting things into stores. And then I started off taking some exams and became a financial advisor.
Right. Was it about that time that you joined the Personal Finance Society?
Oh, it was. It was straight away. I was very early into the professional bodies at the time. And back then it was a forerunner of the Personal Finance Society. So I was early into the qualifications with the Chartered Insurance Institute. And I spent many an evening out and about around the roads of Cheshire and Manchester, meeting with people and networking, and just beginning to get into what was going to be a 20-plus year career in financial services. And then from there, I became interested eventually in matters of compliance and training, and just thinking more and more about the professionalism of the industry. Back in the mid-1990s, there were 250,000 financial advisors, or people who could give financial advice. And gradually, over the last 20 odd years, that number has reduced.
Yeah, it sure has. Yeah, Retail Distribution Review 2013, I think, was the Isle of Man's days. Where the UK was the year before that, I think 2012.
It was 2012, and now across the UK there are around about 26,000 people who can give financial 10%. Advice. Yeah, a very small percentage of what they're
extinction level event.
Well, I think it's interesting, isn't it, that ultimately as both here in the Isle of Man and in the UK, the level of professionalism has increased. Then yes, the numbers of people doing roles in the profession have reduced. But hopefully the level of service that is being produced and the way in which people are able to engage with financial planning in particular and financial well-being and just a broader piece of personal finance is, I think, now at a stage where we can call it a profession.
Mm-hmm. I think you're absolutely right. And as I said in my introduction, that you are currently the president of the Personal Finance Society, and how are you finding that role? This is your year, isn't it?
It is, yes, and I think it's one of those roles that if you're around in a profession for long enough, eventually they ask you to do something, and I was delighted and honoured to be asked to be the president of the Personal Finance Society, and following in some very big shoes, of course, because that's a role that you had a couple of years earlier, and it's really, for me, it's been a fascinating first few months in that role, because one of the things I've been able to do is actually far more than ever before in my career. My career has been quite insular in as much that I've spent a lot of my time working with financial planning firms and practices and businesses, and some time meeting people who engage as customers. And of course, I was a planner myself for a number of years, so I had my own customers. But actually, the last few months, I've been able to meet representatives of consumer organisations. I've been able to meet directly with people at events like the one that we did here on the Isle of Man in October, and really
that was with our own regulator, not the UK one, the Isle of Man.
It was, yeah.
Financial Services Authority. They had a family finance consumer education day, didn't they? And you came over. I remember you voluntarily came over and represented the local membership here. So
it was a great day. We actually set up in a very busy shopping centre not far from here, and I'm sure everybody knows St John's Mill. And
Tinwell Mills is the shopping centre.
Tinwell Mills, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I should get all the terminology right, shouldn't I, Sharon? Yeah. And so we set up in Tinwell Mills, and we stood there all day with lots of information, particularly looking at keeping yourself safe with investments, keeping yourself safe online. And it was really nice to meet people, to hear people's concerns, but also to hear some of the good work that people are doing with their relatives and how they are supporting each other. And really just to see that people take a real interest in personal finance and in financial well-being as well. So I think there's a very broad picture that we in the profession of financial services can be, we can be quite insular, and we can think it's about a certain set of things, but actually it's just day-to-day life.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right on that. Yeah, from your view as a person who doesn't live on the Isle of Man but taking regular trips over, what things would attract you here, knowing what you know about it?
That's a really good question. I've spent a good deal of time now on the island.
Yeah, and you go up and down the country, don't you?
I'm up and down.
And I'm not talking Port Erin to the Point of Ayre here. I'm talking the bigger island.
Yeah, I'm up and down the UK 4.5 days a week. I'm travelling.
I don't know how you do that.
And it's an interesting thing with the internet age. You can get a lot done whilst you're on the move. But 4.5 days a week, I'm travelling, and there are a number of things that I just absolutely adore about coming to the Isle of Man. First of all, of course, the people are great, and you know that. You don't need me to tell you that. But it would be remiss of me to appear on an Isle of Man Island podcast without actually complimenting the island's people. And I think the nice thing is that there's just a welcoming and a general sense of community. And that's something that in some of the bigger conurbations that I spend my time in, you don't pick up that feeling. I'm not saying that community isn't there, but it's a lot harder to actually pick it up and really understand it and engage with it. And then beyond that, I think there's so much opportunity with an island and island life. When you've got a bigger population in the UK, for example, then it's very difficult to get feedback to great ideas. Innovation is a challenging thing. Ultimately, ultimately because you don't have a defined population, and it's difficult to get really good quality feedback and data if you try something out for new. For example, if you're a small business and you've got an idea, your idea can be lost very quickly. But one of the real advantages I see here on the Isle of Man is that actually, because of the nature of the community and because of the fact that you can try things out and you can actually see a real impact very quickly, then that gives the island a real opportunity to boost innovation. And I think about the idea of education in schools for financial planning and for just managing money, just basic financial education. In the UK, trying to squeeze that into the UK curriculum is a real challenge because, of course, the structures are multi-layered and probably far more multi-layered than they are here on the island. The number of people that you need to go through in order to get anything operational is quite a challenge. Whereas here on the island, it's, I think generally friendlier. People know each other. I work with a number of financial services regulators as an example, and it's only on the Isle of Man with the Financial Services Authority that I'm able to pick the telephone up, make a call, and actually speak to the same person whenever I ring. And the people there are incredibly knowledgeable, very professional, but very friendly. And you can have a conversation, and you know that the next time you call, you'll probably be able to get back in touch with that person. So, everything can be facilitated just far more easily to try things out, to innovate, and to look to make a difference.
What was your earliest memory of money? How was it growing up for you?
That's a really good question, and one that I can jump straight to an answer, because actually it's something that I use to illustrate inflation when I'm actually talking to people about the impact of inflation. And it's one of those things I'm sure many people will recognise. My earliest memory of money was pocket money, of course. And I remember when pocket money was 12 pence a week. So it was a 10p piece, a shiny 10p piece. If I was lucky, it was a shiny one anyway, and a 2p piece. And my dad would give me this 12 pence, and I would immediately go to the shop. I was like Charlie Bucket from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I would be straight into the shop and I would buy a Mars bar. So a Mars bar was 12p.
Not a big bar of Willy Wonka's chocolate.
There was none of that available, sadly. Otherwise, it probably would have been. And I would head back home, and every week, by the time I'd got back home, that Mars bar was gone. There was no pleasure delaying, there was no saving, there was nothing like that. It was a case of, I have 12p, I can buy a Mars bar. And I use that story as an example of, obviously, inflation, because if you go and try and buy a Mars bar now, I'm sure it's significantly more than 12 pence.
And significantly smaller.
I think the Mars Corporation would say that it's not, but I've got to say, every time I pick one of those up, they do feel smaller than they did when I was a child. But
well, yeah.
that's maybe because I'm bigger.
That's more a visual one, I think.
That might be perspective, possibly, yeah. But it was interesting as well that before I became a financial planner, and I'd spent those years in food retail before I moved into financial planning, that habit stayed with me. Receive money, spend money habit that I formed as a child was a habit that actually for the first 4 or 5 years of my working life, I received money and I spent money. I didn't think to save it. I didn't think to delay the possible things I could achieve with it. It was a case of, the money's here, I will spend the money. So each month I would go out and I would spend. And it was only in moving into financial advice and financial planning that actually I was able to change those habits from the things that I was learning. But it is really, I find it fascinating to think back to me as a child and those habits that actually now, when I spend time working with schools, etc., it's about establishing really good quality habits early on.
Yesterday, you were able to experience firsthand the frustrations that sometimes we feel living on an island, because I think you spent most of the day at John Lennon Airport, didn't you, waiting for a flight that didn't actually go because of the fog? I spent a good few hours at John Lennon Airport being told that the flight would probably go, and ultimately it didn't. And, it's interesting that I think that a number of things really occurred yesterday that made me think more about the island and how people approach life here. Because the first thing was, I was planning to spend a couple of days on the Isle of Man this trip. And so I had a hotel booked, I had a car booked, I had a number of other things that were arranged. And the first thing was that it wasn't a surprise to anybody that there had been a cancellation. I phoned the car hire place
at the airport, and the excellent people there who look after me when I arrive on the island, and instantly said, "Oh, yeah, we know that your flight is cancelled. Initially it was delayed. We know your flight is delayed, and then ultimately cancelled," and immediately just changed and rearranged the booking. There were no questions. There was no expectation of anything other than they would just deliver impeccable service. I called the hotel, and we'd gone past the point on booking.com where the hotel was actually going to charge me, and I called the hotel and said, would it be possible to reschedule for a later date, fully expecting a charge as I would normally get in the UK, and the hotel couldn't have been more accommodating, which I suppose is their job, of course, but they immediately said yes, of course. They referred me back to the booking agents and asked me to send an email through to the booking agents because it had to be done through them. And then, within 5 minutes of me sending that email, the hotel had confirmed that, yes, of course, I could change my booking and no charge. And so I think that, my experience of being stuck at John Lennon Airport, the carrier even gave me free food vouchers, Sharon. So, ultimately, I didn't mind receiving free food vouchers, and everybody here on the Isle of Man was incredibly understanding and accommodating that I couldn't get over on that particular day. I've been visiting the island regularly for the last 2 years, and that's the first time I've had a cancellation of anything.
It's amazingly regular, the service. I flew most weeks to London City, and in the year I had to do that, I didn't have one cancellation. It was a really great service, so no complaints.
I travel regularly to London every week, and of course I proportionally get far more cancellations going to London on the train.
Do you really?
And it takes a lot longer. It takes me an hour and 45 minutes to get to London, and apart from the airport at each end, it's a 20-minute flight. So given that over a 2-year period, just one cancellation, I think that's
not bad.
I think that's pretty good going.
It's not bad at all, is it? No. When it does go wrong, it can go wrong spectacularly. But yes, for the most part, I think it's a pretty good service.
For me, the thing that really stood out was people's reaction to the fact that I couldn't get to the island, and people couldn't have been more accommodating. So, an absolute testament to just, I suppose, that pragmatism that I find here.
Yeah, how are you getting on with your refund of your baggage and and your refund of your car parking fee in
Well, it's interesting.
Liverpool?
Yeah, everything on the UK end is has been a bit more of a challenge, and I think that maybe is a testament to the fact that here there is that level of pragmatism.
Well, it's nice to know. It's good that you've experienced that firsthand. So, what would you say the main challenges are that the Isle of Man faces?
I think for me, and it's one of those things that I speak only from experience and what I see, is that at the moment across the globe, one of the big benefits and advantages, or one of the things that will drive performance and innovation in the future, is big data. And that access to big data. And when I talk about big data, we're talking about millions upon millions of bits of data that permeate through large populations. And so, whereas decision making can be far more pragmatic in a smaller population, where actually things move so quickly and algorithm-based technologies move so quickly, is in an area where there are huge data sets. And so I think just balancing that challenge, and for an island like the Isle of Man to find a niche within what is a very challenging global environment that is data-driven, where there are small numbers of huge multinationals that are managing data, you can almost be left out of the conversation.
Yes. What would you do if you had a job as a policymaker here? How would you encourage entrepreneurs to come here? What does good look like?
I think that's a good question, and it's maybe not for me to say what good looks like, but if it was me coming to the island, the one thing that I would look to do is understand, first of all, the niche that the island has globally, but also the niche that a business can create within an island environment like this, because it is about understanding the people on the island and what is important to people. And so if it's a business coming from elsewhere, it's really important to understand, I think, that it isn't a one-size-fits-all. What works in one territory may well not work here or in any other territory that's similar. And so ultimately, it's asking questions. It's always about asking questions first.
Sure.
Seek first to understand before being understood. And I think that's going to be the one thing that I would say to anybody looking to set up a business here on the island is, try to spend some time understanding island life, understanding what is important, understanding your legal system and tax system and all of those elements
that are
different.
Yeah, sure.
And very importantly, which I learned very early on, remember not to refer to the UK as the mainland. And that definitely helps along the way as well, I think.
Great. Well, for any aspiring business owners and entrepreneurs, and it's not just relevant to Isle of Man businesses, of course, but what would be your number one business tip?
I think more than anything, I've said it already a couple of times, and I will go back to it because it is, particularly in a globalized, commoditized environment that we're in, it has to be, the primary thing is to find a niche. To understand that these days you don't need to be famous to hundreds of thousands of people. You need a core audience for your product or service of around about 4,000 or 5,000 people. And if you can deliver an amazing service to a small number of people, if you're a small business, then you've got something that is sustainable. In terms of sub-points to that, it's about, as well, not trying to be everything to everybody.
Yeah.
Which is, I know, a subset of the niching element, but so many businesses lose sight of the thing that makes them successful in the very early stages. And if you begin to lose sight of that, and if you try to do too many things, then you end up competing with those big international conglomerates that can do everything very well because they utilize big data, because they have resources that a small business will just never have. And so, we see it in, particularly, I suppose a great example would be the coffee shop, wouldn't it? There'll be, you can have a great local independent coffee house that will serve brilliant coffee, and they'll really understand their local community. And that in itself will be a great business. But it'll be very different from a corporate, a Starbucks or a Costa or something like that. Its profit margins won't be as high, but its USP will be different. Any business now in a setup mode or looking to pivot to something else, it's all really about niching.
It's interesting. So, I know you're current curriculum and training director at NextGen Planners. What have you got involved in that role for the foreseeable future? Oh,
that was the most, and is the most enjoyable thing that I've done so far in my career, Sharon. And ultimately, I'm at that point now. Somebody in an article at some point last year referred to me as an elder statesman, and that came as a bit of a shock, being referred to as an elder statesman. But I suppose with time, you gain perspective, and it's not just financial services that has this challenge. Many professions and industries have a similar challenge, in as much that there's a succession challenge, there's a succession gap, and the profession hasn't spent as much time or effort in developing the next generation of talent as maybe it should have done. So with the role that I have at NextGen Planners, it is one of designing career ladders and career pathways for people wanting to get into the profession. So we work with universities to begin to encourage people into the profession, and then we have programs that assist people's careers right the way up to leadership programs and everything in between. So there's technical qualifications, there's all of those soft skills, there's marketing, there's everything involved in a progression ladder.
That kind of maps forward over quite well to your theme in being PFS President of Leadership Skills this year, I suppose. Yeah,
leadership skills is something that, again, as with understanding money in schools, I think that in the modern age we've lost sight of the opportunity. There are three key things, I think, that aren't and don't appear on the curriculum that history would tell us are really important and should probably be on the curriculum. Understanding money and finance and how to use money is one. Understanding rhetoric and how to influence people with really great quality communication. And then understanding leadership and what it takes to emerge as a leader. And leadership is something that, rhetoric and understanding money are all three things that a lot of the time policymakers seem to think are instinctive. But in actual fact, it's not about instinct. If we go back to ancient Greek times, rhetoric was an education piece that you could actually be funded to do, and maths wasn't. The ancient Greeks understood the power of communication was so important for their society. You can have all the great ideas, but if you don't have the skills to communicate them and to get people behind those ideas, then those ideas just get lost. And so I think that ultimately those three elements, understanding money, being able to communicate well, and understanding the power of leadership and how showing great leadership and allowing leaders to emerge is really important. And we see that now in our politics.
We absolutely do.
We're starting to see emergent leaders, and a leader can be somebody who's a 16-year-old schoolgirl from Scandinavia as much as
taking on the president of the free world.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's really fascinating, and I can see exactly where you're coming from. And I think if we had more time, I think our listeners would be really more interested to hear about the foundations of rhetoric. Yes.
Is that a subtle way of telling me to wrap up now, Sharon?
No. Of all the things you've done throughout your life, what things have made you the most proud and most fulfilled? What would that be?
Oh, that is a good question, isn't it? That's a really interesting question. I think more than anything, it's the nearly 25 years that I've been with my lovely wife, Andrea. Oh. And I know that she'll be listening to this at some point, I'm sure.
She's our listener.
So, she's our listener, yeah, absolutely. But actually, it's hard to be with one person for a very long time and not, throw the odd vase at them and that sort of stuff. No, I'm only kidding.
Did you duck?
Like that. Not always. But no, actually, I think, in modern times, you don't meet that many people who've been together for such a long time. And, Andrea most definitely makes me a better person and keeps me honest and keeps me out there doing the things that I do. And so I think that is the thing that I'm probably most proud of. That,
your family.
That's exactly that. And so yes. So I think, having somebody who can tolerate me for that length of time is probably my biggest achievement.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. So what do you do to relax when you're not being president, NextGen director, travelling up and down the country?
Well, for a little while, I actually played a guitar in a band and enjoyed that.
What sort of band?
It was a covers band, a 90s covers band, Manchester music mostly. So we played some pub gigs and things like that. But the band is in hiatus at the moment, so I've recently started painting. I find that incredibly relaxing. It's the one thing that I've found in life that I completely switch off.
You're really good at it too. I've seen some of the stuff you've done. You put on Twitter. It's really good.
Well, I've got to say, it's probably tolerable. It doesn't make people wince, maybe, but it's one of those interesting. I went along to a painting evening. It was just a random thing that I saw on the internet. I thought we'll go along and give that a try. It was 2 hours where I was completely absorbed, and so now at least once a week I'll try and spend just 2 or 3 hours, and I'll get the acrylics out and I'll have a canvas and I'll do something. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, but it's the process, really. It's one of those things that I find complete mental calm, and so I'd highly recommend it to anybody out there, just to paint for pleasure.
Oh, good. Well, so what membership has NextGen got now? What's it up to?
We've just topped 300, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually the great thing about what the team at NextGen Planners have done is that they've created a community, and it is a niche community. But it all started as a Facebook page, and it began as a community of like-minded people who wanted to help each other out in their career. So to share ideas, to exchange views, and just to offer support. And it's now turned into something that's a bit of a monster, really, from a community perspective. The community forum has had over 50,000 messages posted on it. And, it's remarkable to think that I read all of those messages as they come through. So I do a lot of message reading, and there's not ever been a single negative comment. It's a community that actually is incredibly supportive of everybody else. And many of the people in the community, in the traditional sense, would be maybe considered to be competitors. But they say a rising tide lifts all boats, don't they? And ultimately, I think that's one of the key benefits of this idea of creating a community.
Sure.
That we can help each other and we can be more successful together. And I was a child of the 80s, and in the 80s we were taught a lot that there were winners and there were losers, and it was a very binary, competitive style of environment. Whereas now, with a new generation coming through, I think actually it's a far more collaborative environment.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that across many spheres of influence, aren't we?
Yeah, I think definitely so. And then sometimes it just takes the some of us in the older generation to get out of the way and to facilitate some of that quality of debate.
That's interesting. Thank you. Well, where can people go to learn more about you and NextGen?
I think it's generally find us on the interweb, Sharon. We are, these days there are hashtags and all these other Twitter handles, and there's all sorts of stuff out there.
Okay, if you give them to me, I can put them in the
we can put those in the show notes. There's probably a website and all sorts of technologically advanced things out there that people can find out more.
Okay, well, I think just a couple of things to try to ask everybody that comes on the show really is, are there any books you've read recently that you'd recommend to our listeners as a source of inspiration or just a good read?
Yes, absolutely. For your listener, I would say that anything from Daniel Priestley, I'm a massive fan of. If you're starting a small business, then Oversubscribed is a great book, a brilliant title, and 24 Assets. And they've helped me. I've lifted a couple of quotes during just this last few minutes, really, in terms of some of the great content that Daniel produces, but also Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Anybody who's running a small business will have experienced the challenges that running a small business has, and understanding team functionality. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is actually written as a parable. So it's a very different read from the traditional sort of self-help. It's it's an interesting story amongst anything else, and it's one of those things that it provokes a lot of thought as you go through it. So
I'm sure.
2 great titles there.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. I will make sure that I put those in the show notes as well. It remains for me to thank you so much for coming over to the island and all the great work you're doing, and wish you the best of luck in the remainder of your year as the Personal Finance Society president. You stepped down in September. So, best of luck.
It goes very quickly. So I'm beginning to feel the pressure of time already. I had all these great ideas last September in terms of what we get done this year, and already we're a good chunk through. And so yes, but I'm sure I'll be continuing to visit this great island, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Island Influencers from Thornton Chartered Financial Planners. To find out more and for useful links, visit thorntonfs.com/podcasts.